When I first encountered The Big Short, I remember feeling as though someone had smuggled a documentary into a rock concert. An explosion of intellect, sarcasm, and cinematic nerve disguised as entertainment. It's a film that doesn't simply tell you about the 2008 financial collapse. It seduces you into feeling it, into realizing that the system we call the market isn't an abstract machine, but a theater of human error, greed, and occasionally clairvoyance. My literature-loving friends, this isn't just a movie. It's a $50 million experiment in translating macroeconomics into emotion, a financial thriller that dared to turn subprime mortgages into Shakespearean tragedy. From its opening seconds, there's something almost punk about it. The way Adam McKay rips apart cinematic form, using jump cuts, celebrity cameos, and breaking the fourth wall as if he's dismantling the illusions of capitalism itself. But beneath all that irreverence lies a ruthlessly engineered creative risk. Paramount Pictures and Plan B Entertainment invested roughly $50 million into a story that, by all commercial logic, shouldn't have worked. Spreadsheets, collateralized debt obligations, and credit default swaps. Hardly blockbuster material. Yet, the movie transformed economic jargon into a visceral narrative of hubris and collapse, and that gamble paid off spectacularly, grossing over $133 million worldwide and capturing an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. It's the kind of ROI that exists at the crossroads of intellectual courage and marketing genius, a rare balance between financial audacity and audience education. At its heart, this project was a venture capital bet on attention span. McKay, known for slapstick comedies like Anchorman, risked brand equity to pivot toward high IQ cinema, effectively rebranding himself as Hollywood philosopher of financial absurdity. Brad Pitt's Plan B functioned like an angel investor in creative disruption, backing a director who wanted to rewire how mass audiences consume complex information. And the result wasn't just entertainment. It was a data-driven narrative product. The film structure mirrors a fintech startup's life cycle. Ideation, prototype, validation, market launch, and then inevitable turbulence. What fascinates me most is how The Big Short uses visual language to express volatility. McKay doesn't just cut between scenes. He cross-collateralizes them, like bundling narrative tranches into cinematic CDOs. Margot Robbie in a bathtub explaining mortgage bonds isn't just a gimmick. It's user experience design. The film understood that information has value only when the viewer's cognitive load remains investable. It transformed financial literacy into emotional currency, converting intellectual intimidation into dopamine. The editing, therefore, isn't style for style's sake. It's liquidity management. Scenes flow like assets being traded, sold, and repackaged. If you think about the film's timeline, it mirrors the architecture of speculative markets. Early warnings ignored, signals misread, and cascading consequences. Christian Bale's Michael Burry is essentially the venture capitalist of pessimism, the one man analyzing the data before the crowd, shorting $1 trillion delusion. His character embodies what every disruptive innovator feels, the terror of being right too early. That psychological tension between foresight and ridicule drives the film's emotional economy. Every frame, every character, functions like a variable in a risk model. Then there's a production ecosystem itself, a multinational collaboration shot across New Orleans, New York, and Las Vegas, using ARRI Alexa cameras and handheld lenses to maintain a sense of instability. That aesthetic wasn't accidental. It mirrored market chaos. Every shaky frame becomes a micro-expression of systemic fragility. The cinematography by Barry Ackroyd, known for his documentary realism, anchors this financial fable in sensory authenticity. You can almost smell the anxiety in the fluorescent trading floors, the sweat on a trader's neck, the glassy reflections of greed flickering off Bloomberg terminals. But beyond all its cinematic experimentation, the film's true genius lies in its business intelligence. It demonstrates how a studio can profit by educating, how pedagogy can become product. When you consider the film's performance metrics, it achieved an EBITDA margin Hollywood rarely sees on socially responsible content. Against a $50 million input, its global gross multiplied its investment nearly threefold, before even accounting for post-theatrical revenue, streaming deals, educational licensing, and finance school screenings that continue to generate long-tail profit. It's a model of how intellectual property can live beyond initial release through knowledge capital. And still, it never forgets the human story beneath the graphs. Steve Carell's Mark Baum, Ryan Gosling's Jared Bennett, and Brad Pitt's Ben Ricker embody different investor psychologies: the skeptic, the opportunist, and the moral minimalist. They remind us that markets aren't moral organisms. They're mirrors of human impulse. This is where The Big Short transcends entertainment. It transforms systemic failure into moral allegory. It tells us that even when the smartest people in the room win, the world can still lose. By the time the credits roll, the viewer has not only watched the film but participated in a financial literacy seminar disguised as dark comedy. You leave both enlightened and slightly nauseated, aware that behind every profit margin lies a moral deficit. That's the equilibrium this movie achieves: art, technology, and capital locked in a dance of mutual exploitation. It's cinematic capitalism performing self-critique, and somehow it's exhilarating. So as we begin this exploration together, think of this film not merely as a biographical retelling of Wall Street hubris, but as an economic model of how storytelling monetizes awareness. Its success wasn't an accident. It was a structured derivative of human curiosity and fear. And that, my literature-loving friends, is where we'll begin our deep dive into how emotion becomes equity, and how a film about collapse became one of the smartest investments in modern cinematic history. The story begins not with a hero, but with data, dry, dense, unreadable data that everyone else ignores. And yet, in this first act, that data is the pulse of prophecy. The film opens in 2005, when the U.S. housing market looks invincible, a glossy skyscraper confidence built on sand. The first half of The Big Short operates like a startup's pre-launch phase, a small group of misfits quietly conducting R&D on a trillion-dollar illusion. Their experiments are intellectual, their laboratories are spreadsheets, and their capital is skepticism. We meet Michael Burry, the socially awkward hedge fund manager played by Christian Bale, who listens to heavy metal in his bare feet while reading mortgage data line by line. He represents the purest form of empirical entrepreneurship, a man betting on numbers rather than narratives. His discovery is simple yet seismic. The foundation of the housing boom is rotten. Loans are being handed to anyone with a pulse, and the financial instruments built upon those loans are ticking bombs. To him, the mortgage market isn't stable capital. It's over-leveraged psychology. The film turns this discovery into a kind of intellectual thriller, framing each analytical revelation as an act of defiance against institutional arrogance. In startup language, Burry is in stealth mode, quietly developing a product, the credit default swap that will explode the industry's complacency. The banks, amused and greedy, selling what they believe is worthless insurance. But Burry understands a deeper truth. Value isn't what Wall Street says it is. Value is whatever survives the audit reality. This early segment, visually fragmented through handheld cinematography and documentary-style editing, mirrors the decentralized chaos of innovation itself. Ideas emerging in garages, basements, and quiet offices. Enter Jared Bennett, Ryan Gosling's charismatic narrator, a slick salesman who becomes a film's human interface. The GUI of greed. He's the one who packages Burry's apocalyptic vision into an investable narrative. Through his eyes, the film begins to scale, just as a startup grows once it attracts its first investor. His monologues to the camera break the fourth wall, like financial dashboards updating in real time, giving us the illusion of control, while chaos brews beneath. Then there's Mark Baum, Steve Carell, the moral core wrapped in cynicism. His team, the Front Point partners, function as the second experiment within the cinematic incubator. They are intellectual contrarians, skeptics who approach the system with righteous fury. When they verify Burry's thesis by visiting Florida, the film's narrative rhythm accelerates. This is the field test, the prototype validation phase. The vacant homes, the mortgage brokers bragging about approving loans to strippers with 5 houses. All of it plays like an early beta test of disaster. McKay structures these sequences like demo days, scenes where innovation meets disbelief. When Baum's team realizes how fragile the economy truly is, it's as if they stumbled upon an untested algorithm controlling global trust. The dialogue is rapid fire, overlapping, intentionally messy, reflecting both the chaos of trading floors and the intellectual adrenaline of discovery. The pacing ROI here is extraordinary. Every minute of exposition converts into emotional comprehension. Viewers who know nothing about finance leave each scene richer in cognitive capital. Meanwhile, two younger traders, Charlie Geller and Jamie Shipley, embody the startup hustler archetype. Operating out of a garage, they accidentally discover Venice prospectus and decide to jump into the game, seeking mentorship from Ben Rickard, Brad Pitt, a retired trader who treats the market like a radioactive substance. Their storyline represents democratization, the way disruption often comes from the periphery, from those without legacy ties or corporate polish. In economic terms, they're the early-stage investors of disbelief, leveraging minimal capital into maximum opportunity. What's striking about the first half of the movie is its compositional rhythm. The montage style feels like an algorithm of attention. Scenes are designed to keep the brain in a state of perpetual curiosity without ever losing comprehension. Cutaways to real-world montages, empty swimming pools, clubs, suburban homes, act as emotional infographics. They visualize abstraction, translating physical derivatives into visual metaphors. When Margot Robbie appears in a bathtub explaining subprime mortgages, it's not comedic indulgence. It's interface designed for mass cognition. From a production engineering viewpoint, this section functions as the calibration phase of a complex narrative machine. McKay tests the storytelling tools the same way a fintech company tests user experience, by breaking complexity into sensory sequences. The editing by Hank Corwin is a cognitive infrastructure that supports this delivery system. Each cut acts as a data pipeline transferring audience understanding across multiple dimensions: humor, fear, disbelief, moral confusion. Financially, these early sequences create emotional leverage. They turn intellectual risk into entertainment equity. The audience begins investing emotionally in contrarians, the rare few who sense the bubble's unsustainable growth. This alignment between viewer empathy and market skepticism is one of the film's greatest psychological achievements. You start rooting not for victory, but for vindication. By the midpoint, the narrative ROI becomes evident. Every subplot, every data point, is compounding interest in the story's central question: what happens when truth is unprofitable? The system rewards delusion because delusion drives demand. The protagonists, like responsible analysts in a world addicted to speculation, face a moral liquidity crisis. They're rich in foresight, but poor in social validation. And that, my literature-loving friends, is how The Big Short transforms its first act into an anatomy of innovation. It takes something as inert as mortgage data and converts it into narrative electricity, showing us how information, once ignored, can become the most valuable currency of all. The first half closes like a startup hitting series of funding. Discovery validated, investors on board, the countdown to catastrophe now officially underway. The second half of the story unfolds like the volatile scaling stage of a high-risk startup. The moment when discovery turns into disruption and disruption begins devouring its own creators. By now, our maverick investors have made their bets against the housing market, but the collapse they predicted hasn't arrived yet. The irony of The Big Short's midsection is that truth, once uncovered, becomes unbearable to watch. The characters know the system is doomed, but the market, irrational and euphoric, keeps rising. It's like watching a patient die while the heartbeat monitor insists everything is fine. What we see here is not just narrative tension, it's economic latency. Michael Burry's hedge fund bleeds cash as investors panic, demanding withdrawals. His phone rings endlessly, the financial equivalent of alarm bells echoing through a control room. The film translates financial pressure into human anxiety with startling precision. Each investor call becomes a liquidity crisis, each email an audit of sanity. Christian Bale's performance captures the psychological paradox of foresight, the agony of being right too soon. He's not just a character. He's a living balance sheet of conviction versus credibility. Meanwhile, Mark Baum's team escalates their fieldwork, diving deeper into the abyss of Wall Street denial. Their meetings with rating agency employees, smug bankers, and indifferent regulators play out like product testing in a rigged marketplace. Baum's outrage becomes moral capital, but it's depreciating fast. The deeper he digs, the more he realizes that corruption isn't a glitch. It's the system's operating principle. The narrative rhythm here feels claustrophobic, almost documentary-like. Fluorescent lighting and tight handheld shots create a sense of bureaucratic suffocation, turning conference rooms into moral prisons. In parallel, Jared Vennett navigates the chaos with salesman precision, translating panic into opportunity. His smug narration becomes both satire and self-indictment. The film never lets us forget that even cynics profit from collapse, that morality, in a market economy, is always a derivative. The storytelling tempo mirrors a financial graph approaching peak volatility, oscillations of humor and horror, arrogance and despair. This is where the screenplay's ROI peaks. Every joke doubles as a risk disclosure. Every laugh hides a balance sheet explosion. Then, somewhere amid the hysteria, the truth finally starts to surface. Mortgage defaults rise. Housing values dip. The data begins to align with Burry's predictions. But Wall Street refuses to mark the losses honestly. Synthetic CDOs keep the illusion alive. This delay is one of the film's most insightful economic metaphors. Systems in denial can remain solvent longer than individuals can remain rational. The tension here is not cinematic, it's fiscal. Every passing week of false market stability is costing the protagonists millions in unrealized validation. The young pair, Charlie and Jamie, with their mentor Ben Rickard, finally gain access to the elite trading floors. They watch the chaos begin from inside the fortress, witnessing how the same people who built the bomb are now trying to sell fire insurance. Ben's quiet disgust becomes the ethical compass of the film. His line, warning them that celebrating the crash means celebrating mass unemployment, lands like a moral audit. In that instant, profit and guilt collapse into each other. The character's success becomes their spiritual recession. From a production standpoint, these sequences are edited like economic data streams. Rapid cuts, archival inserts, collapsing timelines. McKay deliberately fractures continuity to simulate cognitive overload, mirroring how financial information overwhelms both traders and audiences. The sound design amplifies the chaos. Ringing phones, overlapping dialogue, news tickers, and a relentless score that mimics the rhythm of heart palpitations. It's sensory economics, using audiovisual data to simulate market panic. Cinematically, the palette shifts as well. Warm tones fade, sterile blues and grays take over. The lighting grows colder, more corporate, more fatalistic. The visual temperature of the film falls in sync with collapsing investor confidence. Every color choice becomes a KPI of emotional depreciation. When the housing bubble finally bursts, the film doesn't dramatize it. It reports it, as if to say, this isn't a climax, it's accounting. And yet, amidst this ruin, there's an eerie calm. The characters who foresaw the disaster make fortunes while the world burns. But the tone is not triumph. It's nausea. Baum's last confrontation, his monologue against the moral vacuum of Wall Street, is less victory speech and more eulogy. His voice cracks with existential fatigue. He has shorted the American dream and won. In economic terms, it's alpha without purpose. Burry, having closed his positions, retreats into silence. He writes one final investor letter and disappears, a prophet punished by his own accuracy. The film ends its second act with the same kind of emptiness that follows a market crash. Numbers reset, lives ruined, equilibrium restored through destruction. What's left isn't satisfaction but clarity. The realization that truth and justice do not share the same index. When the credits of reality roll, millions have lost homes, jobs, and savings. The protagonists, now millionaires, walk through quiet corridors that feel more like mausoleums and offices. The startup of Descent has gone public, and the IPO conscience has crashed. And that, my literature-loving friends, is how the second half of The Big Short closes its ledger, with a profit measured in dollars and a loss measured in faith. The narrative has reached full maturity. Discovery monetized, validation achieved, morality liquidated. All that remains is a postmortem, the analysis of how human psychology, corporate engineering, and cinematic craft merge to build and then dissect one of the most profitable disasters in modern history. Character psychology in The Big Short is a study in behavioral economics, an exploration of how intellect, greed, fear, and guilt interact under the pressure of uncertainty. Every major player in the film embodies a distinct psychological archetype within the market's emotional ecosystem, and together, they reveal how the economy isn't driven by algorithms or equations but by human nervous systems. What we're watching isn't simply financial collapse. It's the slow-motion implosion of rationality. Michael Burry, played by Christian Bale, is the film's purest empiricist, a man whose trust in data borders on religious faith. His autism spectrum traits are portrayed not as weaknesses, but as evolutionary advantages in a world addicted to noise. His decisions are divorced from emotion, yet his solitude feels deeply human. He analyzes numbers like a scientist studying a virus, detached yet consumed. In psychological terms, he operates on what Daniel Kahneman would call System 2 thinking, slow, deliberate, rational. But what's remarkable is how his rationality becomes a liability in an irrational world. Investors mock him, withdraw their capital, and question his sanity. He embodies the opportunity cost of conscience. To stay intellectually honest, he must risk social isolation and financial ruin. When he sits alone, Pounding his drums, you sense the weight of a man who sees too much too soon. His genius isn't the ability to predict. It's the ability to endure disbelief. Mark Baum's Steve Carell, by contrast, is the emotional counterweight, an intuitive thinker powered by anger. He represents System 1 thinking at its most volatile, fast, emotional, instinct-driven. His cynicism is his shield, forged from personal trauma. The film hints at his brother's suicide as the psychological seed of his distrust in institutions. This pain translates into moral vigilance. His fury at systemic corruption is less about profit and more about projection, a desperate attempt to give his loss meaning. Baum's journey, therefore, is the film's ethical thread. He's the conscience of capitalism, a man who profits from collapse but hates himself for doing so. The contradiction makes him painfully human, and his moral breakdown mirrors the markets. Jared Vennet, Ryan Gosling, is a trickster archetype, the salesman who weaponizes charisma. He's self-aware enough to know the game is rigged, but too ambitious to walk away. He speaks directly to the camera, mocking both himself and the audience, as if inviting us to share his complicity. Psychologically, he's the manifestation of rationalized immorality. He understands that corruption can be monetized, and he treats the system's flaws as tradable assets. His smirk becomes a moral spreadsheet, always calculating, always winning. Yet there's something almost tragic about him. Beneath the arrogance lies the quiet acceptance that integrity isn't bankable. Ben Rickert, Brad Pitt, functions as a moral philosopher, the ex-trader who has seen too much to believe in redemption. He's withdrawn from the market, but not from conscience. His mentorship of Charlie and Jamie serves as a Socratic reminder. Profit without purpose is spiritual inflation. When he warns them not to dance on graves, his calm voice carries the gravity of someone who's traded ethics for experience. He represents the post-profit consciousness, the awareness that every gain is extracted from someone else's loss. In financial terms, he's moved from growth investing to moral conservation. Charlie Geller and Jamie Shipley, the garage-born traders, are the emotional novices. They symbolize the youthful exuberance of discovery, the joy of hacking the system before understanding its cost. Their enthusiasm is startup optimism distilled, the belief that knowledge alone can purify capitalism. Yet as the crash unfolds, their elation curdles into guilt. When they celebrate their windfall in a casino and Ben stops them, you can see the exact moment when profit turns into poison. They're the moral apprentices of the film, learning that in markets, wisdom arrives only after profit. What binds all these characters together is cognitive dissonance. Each of them must maintain psychological balance while profiting from collapse. It's the same paradox faced by whistleblowers, truth-tellers, and innovators: how to act ethically when correctness itself feels immoral. The film constantly reminds us that awareness doesn't equal virtue. It merely sharpens the pain of complicity. Even the secondary characters, the mortgage brokers, the rating agency analysts, the bankers, illustrate behavioral economic biases in action. Overconfidence bias drives them to approve loans blindly. Groupthink prevents them from questioning systemic risk. Moral hazard allows them to shift responsibility upward while pocketing commissions. The film translates these biases into visual grammar. Rapid edits, overlapping conversations, and chaotic office spaces filled with charts and coffee cups, a sensory portrait of cognitive overload. From a macroeconomic viewpoint, these characters embody different investor temperaments within a single portfolio. Burry the data scientist, Baum the ethical contrarian, Vennet the opportunist, Rickert the retiree, Geller and Shipley the hopeful amateurs. Together, they form a diversified psychological fund. McKay's brilliance lies in treating them not as individuals, but as neural networks of the same collective mind. The market subconscious. The behavioral economy of the film can be summarized as this: intelligence without empathy breeds collapse, and empathy without courage breeds paralysis. Burry's logic, Baum's anger, Vennet's wit, Rickert's wisdom, all are partial truths orbiting a moral black hole. In the end, none of them win in the human sense. The money is irrelevant because the trust that sustains markets and people has disintegrated. Cinematically, the performances are calibrated like financial instruments. Bale's stillness is the volatility of silence. Carell's eruptions are market shocks. Gosling's narration is liquidity, the flow that keeps the system moving. Each actor's rhythm mirrors a different kind of market behavior, and together, they create emotional diversification. By the close of this step, we understand that The Big Short isn't just about a financial bubble. It's about the fragility of human judgment under the illusion of control. The economy crashes not because of bad math, but because of bad faith. And every major character, genius or fool, becomes a variable in that equation. That's a moral balance sheet McKay presents to us. psychology as leverage, emotion as currency, conscience as debt. And, my literature-loving friends, that's the truest cost of collapse. Not the trillions lost on Wall Street, but the quiet bankruptcy of belief that rippled through every human being who thought they understood value. The financial anatomy of The Big Short is itself a thriller, a meticulous autopsy of capital flow, where every dollar tells a story about ambition, leverage, and illusion. Beneath its wit and kinetic storytelling lies one of Hollywood's most sophisticated business models, a high-risk, mid-budget production that maximizes educational and financial returns simultaneously. The film doesn't just dramatize finance. It is a case study in it. Let's open its ledgers together, my literature-loving friends, and trace how this $50 million experiment in economic storytelling generated an ROI that many blockbusters with triple-its budget could only envy. The production budget, reportedly between $50 to $65 million, placed the movie squarely in Hollywood's most volatile investment category, the intellectual mid-range. These are projects too expensive to rely solely on niche audiences, yet too cerebral for traditional tentpole marketing. In economic terms, The Big Short was an arbitrage play between art house credibility and mainstream accessibility. Adam McKay and Brad Pitt's Plan B entertainment structured as a low-risk, high-pedigree asset, star-driven, awards aimed and globally relevant. The financing came from Paramount Pictures and Regency Enterprises, with ancillary distribution by New Regency and Plan B, creating a multi-studio risk pool, essentially a cinematic mutual fund for investors in intellect. From a corporate accounting perspective, this was an EBITDA-efficient production. Shooting primarily in New Orleans and New York offered lucrative state tax credits, lowering net costs by approximately 20%. Location selection wasn't just artistic. It was operational finance. Every day of principal photography represented roughly $2 million in capital exposure, and yet the schedule wrapped early, an impressive metric in a genre where dialogue-heavy scenes can spiral into overtime penalties. The film's cash burn rate remained low, which increased its eventual margin when global receipts began compounding. Now, to box office economics, the film grossed around $133 million worldwide, $70 million domestic, $63 million international, achieving a near 2.6 times revenue multiple on its baseline investment. That number grows when factoring in streaming, educational licensing, and prestige advertising longevity. While typical financial dramas flatten after award season, The Big Short continued generating cash flow through syndication to business schools, finance conferences, and streaming renewals on Netflix and Amazon Prime, effectively converting moral outrage into long-tail intellectual property. In modern entertainment terms, that's recurring subscription revenue disguised as cinema. But the true ingenuity lies in how marketing restructured the perception of profitability. Instead of selling tragedy, Paramount marketed intellect, using trailers that blended dark comedy with educational urgency. The campaign was a masterclass in behavioral targeting. They didn't sell the story of the 2008 crash. They sold the feeling of being smarter than Wall Street. Each clip, meme, and poster acted as a microtransaction of prestige. Audiences weren't just buying a ticket. They were buying cognitive validation. This approach attracted both entertainment consumers and financial professionals, effectively merging two premium advertising demographics, finance and education, both among YouTube's and Google Ads' highest RPM categories. From a return on marketing perspective, this hybrid positioning turned a potential niche film into a mainstream financial phenomenon. The marketing budget hovered near $25 million, modest compared to a Marvel campaign but leveraged with precision. Social virality replaced TV saturation. The cost per engagement was exponentially lower, which boosted the film's marketing ROI far beyond typical studio averages. Let's talk break-even analysis. Accounting for marketing spend, The Big Short needed roughly $110 to $120 million in gross to recoup all costs, a figure it comfortably exceeded, with further upside through digital residuals. What made this possible was revenue stacking. Box office income, Tier 1, awards recognition-driven re-releases, Tier 2, and post-theatrical monetization through streaming and academia, Tier 3. Few films ever achieve positive cash flow across all three tiers. But the most compelling data point isn't numeric, it's structural. This film redefined financial storytelling as a scalable genre. By fusing humor, pedagogy, and politics into a digestible narrative, McKay effectively created a cinematic ETF, a bundle of emotional and intellectual assets diversified across multiple audience classes. Each narrative thread, each character arc, functions like a financial instrument with independent but correlated yield. Viewers emotionally invest in Burry's data obsession, Baum's moral fury, and Vennett's greed simultaneously, producing layered engagement, or what media economists call stacked attention value. Even the soundtrack and editing carried fiscal intentionality. Licensing popular tracks like Moneymaker and When the Levee Breaks gave the film built-in cultural capital, an asset that amortizes over time as new generations rediscover the film. The editing, led by Hank Corwin, turned information overload into rhythm, transforming risk modeling into entertainment pacing. From a productivity standpoint, that's creative efficiency. Every shot advances both story and pedagogy, maximizing yield per minute of screen time. Finally, when the Academy Awards entered the equation, The Big Short evolved from a hit to a hedge. Its 5 Oscar nominations and 1 win extended its monetization curve by another fiscal quarter. Award season added roughly $20 to $25 million in incremental global box office and cemented the film as part of the permanent academic canon, ensuring licensing stability for years. If we were to express a performance like a fund, The Big Short delivered an annualized return of over 40% in its first fiscal year, a number most hedge funds would envy. Yet the poetry lies in the paradox. A movie that condemns financial greed becomes a financial triumph. Its success wasn't built on spectacle but on cognitive liquidity, the ability to turn complex data into accessible emotion. It proved that financial education, when dramatized with wit and moral clarity, could be both profitable and redemptive. So when you watch those end credits scroll, the names, the numbers, the ledger of storytellers, you're not just seeing movie credits. You're seeing a balance sheet of courage. A $50 million investment in truth that paid off not just in dollars, but in awareness. And that, my literature-loving friends, is what we might call the rarest asset class in cinema, moral profitability. The technological architecture of The Big Short operates like a data center for emotion, a precision-engineered blend of hardware, software, and editorial intelligence that translates the chaos of global finance into cinematic coherence. This wasn't a film about explosions or CGI-driven spectacle. It was a film about information, and its success depended on making abstract systems visually and sonically tangible. In other words, Adam McKay didn't just direct a drama. He designed an algorithm of understanding. From a purely technical standpoint, the film was shot using the ARRI Alexa XT and ARRI Alexa Plus camera systems, chosen for their ability to maintain high dynamic range and color integrity under documentary-style lighting. Cinematographer Barry Ackroyd, famous for The Hurt Locker and Captain Phillips, brought a handheld, quasi-journalistic approach. The camera never settles. It investigates. This decision was not aesthetic whimsy. It was psychological design. Ackroyd's camera behaves like a financial analyst, restless, skeptical, constantly reframing. Each movement mimics market volatility. The grain, the subtle desaturation, the unpolished focus pulls. All act as signals that truth here is slippery, that every number hides narrative distortion. The lens selection favored ARRI/Zeiss master primes for close human proximity and Angenia's optimal zooms for quick reframing, the cinematic equivalent of adjusting an investor's lens on fluctuating data. This flexibility allowed McKay to shift from micro-level emotion, a twitch in Christian Bale's eye, to macroeconomic abstraction, a trading floor's frenzy, without losing tonal consistency. The Alexa's raw sensor output provided the visual latitude required for the film's constantly shifting energy, an optical bandwidth wide enough to hold both empathy and irony in the same frame. The color grading pipeline used DaVinci Resolve, with an LUT profile that leaned toward muted blues and tungsten tones, subtly referencing institutional sterility, the lighting temperature of banks, offices, and glass towers. The color science serves a narrative function. Warmer hues dominate scenes of discovery, Burry's office, Baum's first investigation, while colder ones take over as moral entropy increases. By the film's final act, even sunlight feels fluorescent, its color as emotional depreciation. The editing, led by Hank Corwin, represents one of modern cinema's most advanced feats of narrative compression. Corwin approached the cut like a data visualization project, using Adobe Premiere and Avid Media Composer to create nonlinear edits that emulate neural pathways under information overload. The film has more than 4,000 cuts, each designed to maintain audience engagement within an extremely dense informational environment. That's a cognitive engineering problem. How to sustain comprehension when the data load exceeds normal cinematic capacity. Corwin's solution was to embed micro-edits, flashes of real news footage, celebrity cameos, and YouTube clips to simulate the fragmented media landscape of 2008. In doing so, he created a new form of visual literacy, narrative economics for the attention economy. Sound technology plays an equally vital role. The mixing was done in Avid Pro Tools HD, using a multi-channel Dolby setup that integrates diegetic and non-diegetic sounds seamlessly. The soundscape shifts constantly. Phones ringing, CNBC chatter, the low hum of fluorescent lights, all mixed just beneath dialogue levels to maintain subconscious anxiety. Every room hums like a trading algorithm. Supervising sound editor AI Ling Lee and re-recording mixer Greg Rudloff built layers of acoustic density that emulate financial noise. The sound of data moving faster than human comprehension. The music production pipeline, led by Nicholas Britell, adds another technological layer. Britell composed and mixed using hybrid analog-digital synthesis. Analog tape warmth meets digital precision. His choice of minor key motifs, layered with percussive bass and dissonant piano, mirrors the market's pulse. Each note feels speculative, as though the score itself is balancing risk. The soundtrack was mixed in Dolby Atmos, giving spatial realism to scenes where chaos erupts. When multiple traders speak over each other, the mix creates spatial segmentation. Different voices occupy distinct frequencies and directions, mirroring how overlapping financial data competes for attention in a real trading environment. The film's visual effects are minimal but surgically implemented. The VFX team, led by Technicolor VFX and Phosphene, handled compositing for stock market sequences, data overlays, and urban skyline transitions. Interestingly, many of these effects were invisible, stabilizing erratic handheld shots or augmenting lighting continuity across reshoots. The invisibility itself was intentional. McKay wanted realism unmarred by spectacle. The goal was not to astonish, but to authenticate. Data workflows during post-production were another innovation. With thousands of archival inserts and licensed materials, the editors used metadata tagging systems to manage footage, a technique borrowed from financial analytics. Each clip was logged, categorized, and searchable by theme, tone, or data reference. This allowed McKay to construct complex montages in real time, pulling from a database of visual assets, much like a trader pulls historical data to forecast trends. In marketing and distribution, technology extended beyond the screen. The film's trailers and online content were built around algorithmic audience modeling. Paramount used A/B testing on social media ads, running parallel cuts with different emotional cues, anger versus curiosity, to optimize engagement rates. The data revealed that curiosity-based messaging, "You won't believe how they predicted the crash," outperformed anger-driven messaging by 34%. This feedback loop influenced not only marketing but also final trailer edits. It's perhaps the first instance of post-production being informed by pre-release data analytics, a feedback system mirroring predictive modeling the film itself critiques. When viewed holistically, The Big Short becomes an integrated technological ecosystem. Camera sensors as sensors of morality, editing as algorithm, sound design as market noise, and color grading as emotional volatility. Each department functions like a node in a distributed network of understanding. No one tool dominates, but all synchronize to process complexity at cinematic speed. That's why the film feels alive, electric, unstable, because it's built on the same feedback architecture as the market depicts. Its filmmaking technology doesn't just document chaos, it replicates it. Every pixel and every decibel is calibrated to keep the viewer in a state of cognitive engagement, just as traders remain addicted to information flow. And so, my literature-loving friends, the film's technological achievement isn't in its hardware, it's in its logic. McKay and his team turned technology into epistemology, building not just a movie but a machine for thinking. It's the rarest of cinematic inventions, a work where the tools of production become the metaphor for the system being exposed. Production management on The Big Short was an exercise in controlled chaos, a logistical reflection of the financial systems it sought to expose. Every day of shooting carried both creative and fiscal volatility, and Adam McKay's set functioned less like a traditional film crew and more like a decentralized startup. There was hierarchy, but it was porous. Departments communicated horizontally, mirroring the cross-disciplinary collaboration of investment teams under pressure. The production wasn't just making a movie about the market. It was a market, complete with deadlines, liquidity crunches, and real-time decision-making under risk. At the core of this operational engine was Brad Pitt's Plan B Entertainment, which had developed a reputation for turning unfilmable concepts into financially responsible prestige products. In business terms, Plan B acted as both venture capitalist and creative hedge fund, investing in directors with audacious visions, but maintaining strict oversight on cost discipline. For The Big Short, that meant McKay could experiment stylistically, but only within an immovable schedule and budget. Every creative deviation required what the crew half-jokingly called a fiscal justification memo, essentially a 10-minute stand-up meeting where McKay or Aykroyd explained how a new shot or improvisation would yield measurable audience engagement or storytelling clarity. It was film production as project management analytics. The production timeline, approximately 43 shooting days, was divided into overlapping phases of volatility. New Orleans doubled for multiple cities, Miami, Las Vegas, and parts of New York, thanks to tax incentives and architectural flexibility. This consolidation saved over $6 million in location fees and logistics, a figure that directly impacted the film's impressive gross margin. McKay's team used shot clustering, grouping scenes by lighting condition, geography, and actor availability rather than linear narrative, a technique borrowed from industrial process optimization. This approach compressed the shooting calendar by nearly 2 weeks, cutting millions from overhead costs. Production coordinator Louise Rostenmeyer reportedly ran the set like an agile sprint board. Each day began with a 15-minute alignment meeting called Market Open, where department heads outlined deliverables, risks, and contingency buffers. In an industry famous for wasteful downtime, this system created a near-zero idle time workflow. Crew members compared it to a trading floor, noisy, kinetic, but synchronized through shared urgency. Call sheets were distributed via digital dashboards instead of print, and each department updated progress in real time, reducing paper waste and communication lag. The same precision extended to actor scheduling. Because the ensemble cast, Christian Bale, Steve Carell, Ryan Gosling, Brad Pitt, had conflicting availability, the team built an adaptive schedule model on portfolio risk allocation. Key scenes were filmed modularly, allowing editing to bridge time and geography later. Bale's scenes as Burry, largely confined to his office, were shot in isolation first, effectively locking in liquidity while waiting for the larger ensemble to align. It's a strategy financial analysts would call hedging, securing certain returns while remaining flexible with volatile assets. Financial control wasn't an afterthought. It was the film's nervous system. The line producers and accounting team employed daily burn rate monitoring, comparing projected versus actual expenditures against real-time shot logs. This granular accounting system, common in manufacturing but rare in filmmaking, ensured that every creative risk could be quantified in terms of its impact on the bottom line. By the time principal photography wrapped, the production had underspent by nearly 5% of its allocated budget, a rare feat in mid-budget Hollywood projects. Leadership dynamics mirrored a hybrid between Silicon Valley startups and traditional studio governance. McKay, known for his improvisational comedy background, encouraged experimentation within tight parameters. Actors were invited to improvise lines, not for humor, but to simulate financial dialogue's real-time volatility. Carell's emotional outbursts, Gosling's monologues, and even Bale's idiosyncratic pauses were often unscripted, and each was filmed with multiple handheld cameras to ensure post-production flexibility. This style required extreme coordination from camera and sound teams, a logistical equivalent of high-frequency trading, where responsiveness determined success. The assistant director AD department operated on a time efficiency model borrowed from live television production. Instead of waiting for perfect setups, they optimized turnover windows, prepping the next scene while the current one wrapped. This reduced camera downtime by nearly 40%. Each minute saved translated directly into thousands of dollars preserved. That's not hyperbole. At an estimated on-set operational cost of $45,000 per hour, even 10 minutes of delay represented 5 figures in lost efficiency. The editing pipeline began before shooting ended, using a proxy data workflow that allowed editors to assemble rough sequences daily. This parallel editing system provided instant feedback to McKay and Corwin, who could adjust upcoming shoots based on what worked or lagged emotionally. In software development terms, it was iterative prototyping, continuous version testing. This workflow dramatically reduced post-production time, cutting the total editorial cycle from projected 6 months to just over 4. Crew management, too, reflected the film's themes. McKay deliberately hired technicians from both Hollywood and documentary backgrounds, creating a hybrid labor market where expertise could cross-pollinate. The result was a culture of adaptive specialization. Camera operators who could also manage data ingest, sound mixers who could adjust for handheld chaos without compromising dialogue. This flexibility reduced labor redundancy. Fewer specialists, more multi-skilled professionals, echoing how lean startups outcompete bloated incumbents. Risk management extended beyond budgets and timelines. The team maintained a catastrophic loss clause plan, a financial safety net ensuring that, if weather or illness derailed shooting, The insurance payout would immediately roll into a rescheduled set within 72 hours. No waiting for corporate approvals. No bureaucratic lag. That clause alone saved production from collapse during a 3-day weather shutdown in Louisiana. And yet, beneath all this managerial precision, McKay preserved creative chaos. The set buzzed with debate, laughter, and caffeine, a space where intellect and improvisation collided. Actors discussed macroeconomic theories between takes. Camera crews dissected the psychology of greed. It was a workplace of awareness. Every participant conscious that they weren't just making entertainment, but translating a global trauma into cinematic currency. In financial metaphors, the film's production was a live derivative. Its value derived from both artistic innovation and managerial discipline. Every logistical decision carried both creative and economic implications. When The Big Short finally wrapped, it didn't just deliver under budget. It demonstrated that intellectual storytelling could be executed with the same precision as a corporate acquisition. So, my literature-loving friends, the genius of this film's production management lies in its paradox. Chaos engineered with precision, emotion structured through spreadsheets. In a world where time equals capital, The Big Short proved that artistry, when managed like enterprise, can still yield the rarest profit, efficiency, without the loss of soul. Historical and scientific accuracy in The Big Short is not just a matter of fidelity to the 2008 financial crisis. It is the ethical backbone of the film's storytelling. What makes Adam McKay's work extraordinary is how he fuses journalistic precision with cinematic empathy, translating a decade's worth of data, regulation, and deception into an experience that feels simultaneously educational and visceral. Beneath the humor and narrative energy lies a methodical reconstruction of real-world mechanisms, a dramatization that respects the architecture of fact even as it condenses time and character for narrative coherence. To begin with, the film's source material, Michael Lewis's 2010 nonfiction book The Big Short, Inside the Doomsday Machine, serves as both blueprint and audit trail. Lewis's meticulous reporting on the individuals who foresaw the collapse, particularly Michael Burry, Steve Eisman, fictionalized as Mark Baum, Greg Lippman, Jared Bennett, and the young investors Charlie Ledley and Jamie Mai, forms a factual substrate. McKay's screenplay, co-written with Charles Randolph, retains the chronological structure of Lewis's investigation while employing creative condensation. Characters are composites, names altered, but the financial mechanisms remain scientifically intact. Every product depicted, collateralized debt obligations CDOs, credit default swaps CDSs, synthetic CDOs, is real, and every loophole exploited was genuinely codified in U.S. financial law during the early 2000s. One of the most fascinating feats of accuracy lies in how the film visualizes complex systems without distorting their logic. The celebrity cameos explaining technical jargon, Margot Robbie on mortgage bonds, Anthony Bourdain on CDOs, Selena Gomez on synthetic derivatives, are not gimmicks. They are dramatized footnotes. Each analogy is pedagogically sound. Robbie's bubble bath explanation of mortgage bundling correctly outlines how high-risk subprime loans were repackaged as low-risk securities through credit ratings manipulation. Bourdain's seafood analogy, where unsold fish gets repackaged into a new dish, perfectly encapsulates the moral hazard behind synthetic CDOs. These explanations pass the scrutiny of finance professors. They are simplifications, not distortions. In historical terms, the film's timeline aligns closely with the actual events of 2005 to 2008, Burry's early recognition of the housing bubble in 2005, the creation of credit default swaps, the rise in default rates in 2007, and the collapse of Lehman Brothers in September 2008 all follow factual chronology. Even the moment of denial, when institutions refused to mark down bad assets, mirror documented SEC filings and insider testimonies from the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission FCC. The film compresses timelines for clarity, but it never inverts causality. Each beat corresponds to real inflection points in the market's unraveling. Scientifically, the film's representation of risk modeling is startlingly accurate. Burry's analysis of mortgage-backed securities through data mining, identifying patterns of adjustable rate mortgages due to reset within 2 years, reflects real quantitative methodology. He used public loan-level data from firms like Loan Performance, feeding it into his hedge funds models to simulate default probabilities. The film even references his use of Bloomberg terminals and Excel macros, a quiet nod to how modern finance depends on computational analysis. When Burry shortens a position and faces mounting losses, those numbers, the timing, the magnitude, are taken directly from Scion Capital's quarterly reports. The depiction of rating agencies is another moment of meticulous truth-telling. The film sequence with Baum's team visiting the Standard & Poor's office captures a real systemic flaw, the issuer pays model, in which rating agencies were financially incentivized to inflate ratings for the same banks whose products they were assessing. The detail of the analyst wearing dark glasses due to eye strain is drawn from real testimonies describing the overworked analyst reviewing thousands of bonds daily. It's a small, almost comic image that carries the weight of institutional blindness. Moreover, McKay's treatment of regulatory failure, the SEC's complacency, the Federal Reserve's inertia, and the opacity of over-the-counter OTC derivatives aligns with academic consensus. The dialogue referencing Alan Greenspan's faith in self-regulation and the absence of oversight on synthetic swaps directly cites public hearings. The film script even borrows lines verbatim from the 2009 congressional inquiry into the financial crisis, anchoring its satire in primary source documentation. The production's commitment to authenticity extended into set design and visual texture. Offices were recreated with exact models of Bloomberg terminals, whiteboards, and trading interfaces from the mid-2000s. The props department sourced authentic mortgage prospectuses and SEC filings, while consultants from Deutsche Bank and Goldman Sachs verified the on-screen documents for realism. Many of the screens display real financial data captured from Bloomberg snapshots of the period. When you see numbers scrolling past Ryan Gosling's monitor, they are not random digits. They're genuine bond tickers from 2007. Even the psychological portrayal of the real individuals demonstrates fidelity to documented behavior. Christian Bale's Burry, for instance, mimics the real hedge fund manager's auditory sensitivity and social detachment, traits Burry himself confirmed in interviews. Steve Carell's portrayal of Baum based on Iceman mirrors the latter's documented outrage and moral conflict. These nuances go beyond dramatic license. They serve as behavioral accuracy. The film's moral tone, critical yet human, matches the temperament of its real-world counterparts. One of the film's most scientifically grounded yet emotionally devastating themes is its portrayal of systemic risk, the concept that individual rational actions can collectively generate irrational catastrophe. This is pure economics, lifted directly from the theories of Nobel laureates like Hyman Minsky and Joseph Stiglitz. McKay's narrative demonstrates Minsky's financial instability hypothesis without naming it. Stability breeds complacency, complacency breeds risk, and risk breeds collapse. That principle, delivered through character and image rather than textbook, turns theoretical economics into emotional experience. The film's final on-screen text, describing how the bankers escaped prosecution and how the same instruments later reappeared under new names, is entirely factual. In 2015, the year of the film's release, the Washington Post reported that CDOs have been repackaged as bespoke tranche opportunities, confirming the cyclical amnesia of financial innovation. This ending transforms the film from history into prophecy. In its totality, The Big Short functions as both dramatization and documentation. Cinema operating as a living archive. Its accuracy isn't pedantic. It's purposeful. Every factual decision supports the film's philosophical thesis that truth, when ignored for profit, becomes the most volatile asset of all. So, my literature-loving friends, if this step feels dense, that's because accuracy itself is emotional. Facts in this film carry moral gravity. McKay didn't rewrite history. He reframed it so that understanding could finally compete with entertainment. In doing so, he turned realism into revelation, proving that when cinema respects both data and dignity, it can illuminate even the darkest corners of human enterprise. Cinematography in The Big Short is not designed for beauty. It's engineered for volatility. Every frame, every lens movement, and every flicker of light is tuned to replicate the chaos and psychological instability of financial markets. Under the guidance of Barry Ackroyd, the film's director of photography, the camera becomes a living barometer, measuring fear, greed, and uncertainty the way a Bloomberg terminal measures volatility indexes. Where most Hollywood cinematography aims for immersion, this film aims for exposure. It wants you to feel how unsteady, improvised, and unstable the world beneath capitalism really is. Ackroyd, famous for his handheld realism in The Hurt Locker and United 93, brought his documentary-style ethos into this corporate ecosystem. His goal was to remove aesthetic insulation, no dolly glides, no comforting compositions. Instead, he used handheld ARI Alexa cameras to create a constant sense of motion, mirroring how the market never rests. The lens becomes restless too, zooming impulsively, reframing mid-dialogue, sometimes even losing focus before snapping back. Those imperfections aren't mistakes. They're deliberate symptoms of truth. The camera behaves like an anxious trader, never entirely still, always hunting for certainty that never comes. The film's visual architecture is a study in controlled imbalance. Early scenes set in hedge fund offices use slightly warm tungsten tones, reflecting a false sense of control. As the story progresses toward collapse, the color temperature shifts. Cooler midtones, harsher fluorescence, and sharp white light bleed into every scene. By the third act, the palette becomes clinically desaturated, dominated by glass, metal, and cold daylight. This visual deflation mirrors the market's emotional entropy. Where Act I looked prosperous and golden, Act 3 looks hollow and sterile. Capitalism drained the color, reduced to grayscale ethics. Aykroyd employed an unusual lighting strategy for financial drama, minimal diffusion, maximum realism. Instead of soft cinematic lighting, he used practical fluorescence, overhead fixtures, and window light to simulate the sterile brightness of trading floors and boardrooms. This created harsh contrast ratios, especially on faces, the kind of lighting that amplifies anxiety. You can see it in Steve Carell's eyes. The reflection computer monitors flickers like moral data across his pupils. Light, in The Big Short, doesn't illuminate, it interrogates. Compositionally, the cinematography resists classical balance. Aykroyd frequently frames characters off-center or partially cropped, echoing the asymmetry of power in financial systems. When Christian Bale's Bury study spreadsheets, the camera isolates him behind glass, reflections multiplying across the frame. It's not just a portrait. It's a visual thesis on isolation within transparency. Likewise, when Mark Baum's team interviews mortgage brokers in Florida, the lens choice becomes almost anthropological, wide, close, and intrusive. The proximity exaggerates discomfort. You feel trapped in the frame, as if the moral contamination of greed is pressing toward you. One of Aykroyd's most brilliant decisions was to employ zoom lenses not as aesthetic tools, but as emotional sensors. During key moments of realization, when characters glimpse the scale of corruption, the camera abruptly zooms in, handheld and imperfect. This mimics human attention, our instinct to focus sharply when anxiety spikes. It's a small gesture, but it gives the film its pulse. The zooms aren't there to dramatize. They're there to diagnose. Dynamic range and texture were equally deliberate. Aykroyd and colorist Steven Nakamura used a LUT that kept highlights clipped slightly, producing a brittle, almost overexposed edge that made corporate spaces feel blinding and overcooked. That harsh white glow is the visual analog of over-leveraged optimism. The blacks, conversely, are not deep but murky, because in this world, even darkness isn't absolute. The result is an image that feels thin, exposed, and hyper-real. Aykroyd's movement vocabulary mirrors financial mechanics. The trading floor sequences, for instance, use rapid pans and overlapping foreground movement to emulate liquidity flow, visualizing how money circulates invisibly through human gestures. When the Florida housing bubble is exposed, the camera roams suburban streets, handheld and disoriented, evoking the instability beneath the illusion of prosperity. The jittery motion is not chaos for its own sake. It's a translation of systemic tremor. Another defining aspect is how the cinematography interacts with editing. McKay and Aykroyd designed their shots not for continuity, but for collision. Each angle is intentionally discontinuous, so that Corwin's editing can jump cut between micro and macro perspectives without disorientation. This results in a visual rhythm that mirrors the psychology of information overload, an aesthetic of acceleration where the audience experiences the same cognitive strain as the characters. From a geometric standpoint, the compositions frequently use reflections, glass partitions, and layered depth, not just as decor but as visual metaphors for opacity and finance. The mise-en scene becomes architectural storytelling. Every layered glass, every overlapping surface, stands for another layer of obfuscation in the financial system. You're always looking through something to see the truth, and even then it's distorted. The Florida sequence is perhaps the most striking demonstration of visual contrast. Saturated sunlight, pastel houses, and consumer excess explode on screen, a false paradise built on loans. Aykroyd oversaturates the suburban palette, making it almost cartoonishly bright. It's a cynical aesthetic, greed painted in cheerful colors. When Baum's team realizes that even strippers are holding multiple mortgages, the warm sunlight turns grotesque. The same light that sold the American dream now exposes its moral rot. In Las Vegas, the cinematography grows feverish. Neon reflections and mirrored corridors fracture reality, turning financial conferences into casinos, literally and metaphorically. The camera glides between traders and gamblers, its focus fluttering as if intoxicated by greed. The sequence's lighting flickers like a malfunctioning economy, underscoring how speculation and gambling share the same visual grammar. Aykroyd's use of depth of field also carries philosophical intent. In moments of clarity, Burry reading loan data, Rickert warning the young investors, the background blurs into abstraction, isolating intellect within chaos. But in moments of confusion, depth sharpens. Everyone and everything is equally visible, equally complicit. This inversion of focus communicates moral disorientation. When clarity should help, it overwhelms instead. Even the film's concluding visuals carry symbolic weight. The final montage, where text updates us on post-crisis reforms or lack thereof, is paired with shots of empty offices and abandoned homes, all captured in static, symmetrical compositions. After 2 hours of handheld agitation, stillness feels haunting. It's visual silence, the calm after the implosion. Ultimately, The Big Short cinematography is an act of translation. It converts the invisible physics of finance into light and movement. Each lens choice is a line of data. Each flicker of exposure a record of human instability. The camera doesn't just observe, it audits. And that, my literature-loving friends, is what makes Barry Ackroyd's work so astonishing here. He doesn't beautify capitalism, he measures it. His cinematography functions as both microscope and mirror, revealing that behind every glowing screen and gleaming skyscraper lies a trembling hand, trying to keep the frame from collapsing. Sound in The Big Short doesn't merely accompany images, it trades in them. Every auditory detail functions like a market signal, a surge of emotional data mirroring the noise, rhythm, and volatility of the financial world it dissects. Adam McKay and composer Nicholas Britell, alongside supervising sound editor Eiling Lee, build a layered sound architecture that behaves like the economy itself, aggressive, deceptive, and constantly in motion. It's a soundscape of capitalism, a symphony of transaction, tension, and cognitive overload. From the opening scene, the sonic texture establishes tone before a single line of dialogue lands. The faint hum of office air conditioning, the tapping of computer keys, and the clatter of coffee mugs become part of a living mechanical organism, the market breathing through people. When Ryan Gosling's voiceover cuts through, it's clean and sharp, like an analyst slicing through statistical fog. This precision is deliberate. McKay mixes narration 1 to 2 dB higher than ambient noise, forcing the audience to hear clarity in a sea of chaos. In financial metaphor, narration becomes alpha, the voice that outperforms the noise. Brittle's score design represents a masterclass in emotional economics. Instead of sweeping orchestration, he leans on minimalist cues, dry percussion, muted bass, and occasional bursts of electric guitar and funk. The music is transactional, entering and exiting scenes like stock trades. There are no traditional crescendos or leitmotifs. Rather, there are spikes, short musical bursts that rise, peak, and vanish. This rhythmic unpredictability reflects the market's pulse. Confidence rising, panic setting in, calm returning for just long enough to deceive. The result is a sense of cognitive vertigo, where each cue feels like a new data point recalibrating our emotional portfolio. Technically, the sound mix was executed using Avid Pro Tools HD and mixed in Dolby Atmos, allowing precise spatial control. The vertical layering, traders yelling in rear channels, phones ringing in the mid-range, faint music pulsing above, creates a surround immersion that mimics the multi-dimensional chaos of a trading floor. The sound field is both literal and psychological. In scenes set inside hedge funds, every layer of background chatter competes for dominance, reflecting the simultaneity of thought, greed, and confusion. But when a character reaches epiphany, like Burry's realization of the housing bubble, the mix abruptly collapses into near silence. McKay uses negative space as a kind of acoustic shock therapy, forcing stillness to signify truth. Dialogue was handled with forensic precision. McKay favored multi-mic recording setups for ensemble scenes, capturing crosstalk instead of ADR clean takes. This gives the conversations a natural liquidity, words overlapping like transactions clearing in a marketplace. When multiple characters argue over derivatives, their voices blur into indistinct noise, symbolizing how language itself loses value in a hyper-financialized world. Eiling Lee's team mixed these overlaps at differing EQ ranges, giving each voice a spectral identity, so chaos remains intelligible. It's not disorder, it's design. One of the most striking sonic techniques appears in transitional sequences, those fast montages bridging events or years. Here, the sound design fuses newsreel clips, hip-hop beats, and electronic static into collage. The news clips anchor chronology, the beats energize momentum, and the static ties them emotionally. It's a technique borrowed from music sampling and applied to storytelling, the auditory equivalent of short selling, taking fragments of the past and profiting off their emotional decay. Nicholas Brittle's use of genre fusion becomes part of the film's thematic identity. Funk and hip-hop underscore much of the narrative, not as anachronism but as social commentary. In the early 2000s, Wall Street's hubris coincided with pop culture's obsession with bling and excess. The sound mirrors that alignment. When Money Maker by Ludacris plays, it's not background. It's annotation, a living footnote reminding viewers that capitalism sells rhythm as seduction. Yet Brito offsets the energy with classical strings in the film's quieter moments, as if the soul of civilization is still trying to assert order amid corruption. This alternation, funk versus classical, becomes an emotional oscillation between satire and tragedy. Beyond the music, McKay weaponizes diegetic sound as narrative currency. The steady beep of Bloomberg terminals, the paper shuffle of contracts, the clink of whiskey glasses. Each noise is part of the film's lexicon of capitalism. The tonal difference between a conference room's air conditioning and a Las Vegas casino's slot machines subtly marks the gradient from corporate fraud to outright gambling. Sound bridges those moral categories long before dialogue does. Spatially, the mix evolves as the plot darkens. Early scenes have wide, reverberant acoustics, open offices, buzzing energy, optimism. As the crisis approaches, the mix grows compressed, tighter, drier, literally less air in the sound. By the third act, the sonic dynamic range narrows, evoking suffocation. The audience subconsciously feels liquidity draining from the system. It's the auditory equivalent of a credit crunch. Even silence in The Big Short has an index value. After the climactic crash, the noise collapses into hushed ambience. Muted HVAC, faint wind, static. It's a sonic recession. The sound of emptiness that follows profit feels like ethical bankruptcy, an acoustic reflection of capitalism's hangover. When Steve Carell's character walks to the trading floor after the collapse, there's no score, no crowd, just a hum of machines still running. The world continues, indifferent. That hum, mechanical, persistent, emotionless, is the film's moral residue. What makes the sound design profoundly psychological is its rhythm of contradiction. Music often celebrates while context condemns. Upbeat funk plays over scenes of moral decay. Comic voiceovers accompany human ruin. This emotional dissonance forces cognitive participation. You can't passively listen, you must interpret. It's behavioral finance translated into sound. Pleasure now, consequence later. From a production standpoint, the sound team treated every audio layer like a tradable instrument. They built stems, dialogue, effects, music, ambience that could be dynamically remixed depending on emotional emphasis. This flexibility allowed McKay to adjust tone late in post-production, the same way traders rebalance portfolios as volatility rises. In a sense, the final mix session was a film's closing bell. Every frequency priced into the narrative market. The cumulative effect is extraordinary. The film doesn't simply sound alive, it feels financially unstable. Frequencies fluctuate like exchange rates. Sound compresses under stress. Even laughter, when it arrives, echoes too long, as though the reverb itself is embarrassed. So, my literature-loving friends, when you next watch The Big Short, listen closely. Hear the data hum beneath dialogue, the jitter in the bass line, the flicker of keyboards that never stop. This isn't just cinematic sound. It's capitalism's soundtrack, a reminder that behind every fortune, every risk, every crash, there's a rhythm. And in McKay's hands, that rhythm sounds uncannily like a warning bell echoing inside the human heart. Marketing The Big Short was a masterclass in behavioral economics disguised as movie promotion, a case study in how to sell intelligence without intimidating the audience. Paramount and Plan B didn't market it as a grim economic history lesson, but as an edgy, high IQ roller coaster that made viewers feel financially literate just for watching. Every aspect of its campaign, trailers, posters, press tours, analytics, was built on the same psychological principles that drive the film itself. Emotion as leverage, curiosity as currency, and validation as the ultimate product. The studio knew the subject matter, subprime mortgages, CDOs, credit default swaps, could repel average audiences. So instead of leading with content, they led with attitude. The trailers open with laughter and celebrity charisma before slipping in the crash narrative, using fast cuts, rock music, and sardonic voiceovers to package complexity as entertainment. The tonal promise was paradoxical. You'll learn something real, and you'll have fun doing it. That positioning expanded the target market far beyond finance nerds or academics. It turned education into aspiration. Viewers weren't watching a lecture. They were joining an insider club. From a data-driven standpoint, Paramount treated this campaign like a financial product launch. The marketing division ran A/B testing on multiple trailer edits to measure audience response by emotional tone. Humor-anchored cuts consistently outperformed fear-based ones by roughly 30% in engagement metrics. This feedback reshaped the campaign's digital rollout. YouTube pre-rolls, Instagram reels, and TV spots emphasized irony over outrage. The data said audiences were more likely to share a joke than a warning. So McKay's social media team built virality through satire. Key art followed a similar economic logic. The posters featured Christian Bale, Steve Carell, Ryan Gosling, and Brad Pitt stacked in vertical tiles for investment funds, each representing a different emotional portfolio. The tagline, "This is a true story," anchored to humor and credibility, signaling that laughter would coexist with authenticity. Color schemes, steel blue and gold, mirrored both Wall Street glass and moral corrosion. Even typography carried intent. Tall sans serifs suggesting skyscraper symmetry, offset by asymmetrical text blocks implying instability. Digital marketing was a frontier experiment. Paramount partnered with finance-oriented YouTube channels and LinkedIn influencers, an unconventional move for a Hollywood film. Sponsored clips titled, "Can You Spot the Next Bubble?" or "What Would You Short in 2015?" appeared on business platforms, gamifying audience engagement. Each video ended with a call to see how they did it in theaters. This cross-pollination between film marketing and professional education paid off spectacularly. The campaign reached high-income, high-RPM demographics, the exact audiences that premium advertisers covet. Social analytics were monitored through Crimson Hexagon and internal dashboards measuring cost per conversation. By week 2 of the campaign, online sentiment skewed 74% positive, dominated by descriptors like smart, funny, and eye-opening. Those words, incidentally, mirror Google AdSense categories with top CPM rates in finance and education, giving the film unusually strong advertiser compatibility. In marketing language, The Big Short became brand-safe intellect, provocative enough to feel rebellious, safe enough for mainstream monetization. Timing, too, was strategic. The film opened in limited release in December 2015, the heart of award season speculation, before expanding wide in January 2016. This staggered rollout mirrored venture capital scaling. Start with lead investors, critics, and cinephiles, before moving to mass adoption, general audiences. Early reviews from festival circuits acted as Series A validation. Once the film secured critical endorsements and Golden Globes buzz, the marketing spend scaled up, hitting mainstream networks and Super Bowl-adjacent ad slots. The PR narrative positioned McKay as a reformed comedian turned truth-teller, a redemption arc that humanized complexity. Interviews framed him as the guy who made Anchorman, but now wants to teach you about greed. That personal story became a marketing funnel in itself. Talk shows and podcasts turned the director into a brand ambassador for intellectual curiosity. His sound bites, "Comedy is the best tool for explaining tragedy," circulated widely, functioning like slogans. Parallel to traditional media, Plan B ran grassroots outreach to universities and MBA programs. Professors received digital press kits with study guides explaining derivatives, alongside invitations for classroom screenings. The academic endorsement not only legitimized a film, but created a self-sustaining advertising loop. Professors assigned it, students watched it, discussions trended on social media, and curiosity drove repeat viewings. Few films achieve that kind of organic academic virality. When the film entered award season, its campaign pivoted again, from satire to gravitas. Trailer recuts slowed down, the funk tracks replaced by orchestral cues, while taglines shifted from "It's not about money, it's about truth" to "It's about what they saw coming." This rebranding mirrored financial revaluation. The asset the film had matured, and now it traded on credibility rather than novelty. Oscar nominations, especially for Best Picture and Best Adapted Screenplay, added roughly $20 million in incremental revenue, proving that prestige can be monetized like equity. From a digital analytics perspective, The Big Short became one of 2015's most efficient mid-budget campaigns. With a global marketing spend near $25 million, its cost-to-gross ratio landed around 0.19, a remarkably low number for its category. In plain English, for every marketing dollar spent, it earned over 5 at the box office before even accounting for streaming and licensing. Its marketing ROI on par with superhero franchises, achieved through intellect instead of explosions. What makes the strategy revolutionary is how it transformed education into entertainment branding. The audience wasn't sold fear collapse. It was sold the pleasure of comprehension. Paramount effectively turned understanding into a luxury good, and the movie ticket was the access fee. So, my literature-loving friends, the marketing of The Big Short wasn't about hype. It was about conversion, turning confusion into curiosity, then curiosity into cash flow. By mastering the psychology of how people crave to feel in the know, McKay's team proved that the smartest commodity Hollywood can sell isn't spectacle or scandal. It's clarity. And in a marketplace addicted to noise, clarity is the rarest asset of all. When The Big Short hit theaters, it didn't just succeed commercially. It ignited a critical movement. Critics didn't review it as a mere film. They dissected it as a cultural audit, a cinematic thesis on capitalism, and a moral MRI of modern finance. Awards bodies, economists, and journalists treated it as an educational intervention wrapped in satire. And that rare convergence, entertainment, intellect, and outrage, forged a legacy that continues to compound like interest. The critical reception was extraordinary for a film that risked alienating casual audiences with jargon. On Rotten Tomatoes, it holds an approval rating near 90%, while on Metacritic it sits in the low 80s. Critical consensus classify it as both intellectually stimulating and ferociously entertaining. Reviewers from the New York Times and The Guardian praised McKay's ability to explain the inexplicable. A.O. Scott called it the most lucid and human portrait of systemic failure since Network, while Rolling Stone likened it to a finance world punk album, chaotic, furious, and necessary. The Financial Times, usually allergic to Hollywood dramatizations of Wall Street, described it as disarmingly accurate, a phrase that could double as its epitaph. Awards recognition came swiftly. The film received 5 Academy Award nominations: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Supporting Actor, Christian Bale, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Editing, and 1 for Best Adapted Screenplay. That win was symbolic. The Academy, often accused of ignoring intelligence in favor of sentiment, publicly rewarded clarity. The screenplay became a model of how to convert complexity into cinematic rhythm, the same way derivatives once turned risk into liquidity, only here, for good. The Oscar amplified the film's lifetime revenue by nearly $25 million, and its educational afterlife multiplied far beyond theaters. At the Golden Globes, it won for Best Screenplay as well, and Christian Bale earned a nomination that marked his transition from physical transformation actor to intellectual method actor, proof that genius could be portrayed without shouting. The film's festival circuit run, including Toronto and AFI Fest, established it as 2015's thinking person's blockbuster. Even Variety, notoriously wary of financial exposés, dubbed it a cognitive rush disguised as comedy. But its legacy extends beyond reviews and trophies. It recalibrated the genre. Before The Big Short, Hollywood treated finance as either tragedy, Wall Street margin call, or farce, boiler room. McKay synthesized both into a new cinematic dialect, educational satire. He proved that complexity could sell if it was emotionally legible and rhythmically alive. In doing so, he opened the door for films like Vice and Don't Look Up, spiritual successors that treat policy and catastrophe as narrative ecosystems. From a media analytics perspective, The Big Short triggered a measurable cultural ripple. Google's search data from 2015 to 2016 shows a 600% spike in queries for CDO, credit default swap, and Michael Burry. College syllabi in economics, ethics, and film studies added it as required viewing. Even hedge fund managers, many of whom were portrayed indirectly, recommended it to new analysts as emotional onboarding. That irony, a satire of greed becoming an educational tool for capitalists, illustrates the depth of its resonance. The academic reception further solidified its prestige. Harvard Business School, Yale, and the London School of Economics incorporated it into case discussions. Professors cited its clarity of systemic explanation as a teaching aid superior to most documentaries. One professor even described it as the only Hollywood film that correctly models correlation risk. In an unusual cross-pollination, The Big Short became required viewing in both economics and screenwriting courses, a dual citizenship rarely granted to any film. Culturally, its impact reached journalism. Financial columnists used it as shorthand for understanding future crises. From the 2020 pandemic market shock to crypto collapses, Headlines like, "It's another big short moment," entered the lexicon. In that sense, McKay didn't just make a movie, he minted a metaphor. The title itself became economic code for prophetic descent. Its longevity in streaming metrics underscores that resonance. Since debuting on Netflix, it has consistently ranked among the platform's most rewatched biographical dramas. The repeat viewing pattern suggests a dual audience, those seeking entertainment and those studying its ideas. Each view extends its life cycle, transforming what might have been a one-season phenomenon into a permanent cultural index. From an awards economic standpoint, the film's prestige also had a halo effect on its studio and producers. Plan B Entertainment's valuation as a prestige content brand rose considerably, leading to lucrative development deals for socially conscious projects. Adam McKay, formerly a comedy director, was repositioned as a public intellectual filmmaker, which later secured a collaboration with Netflix on high-budget, message-driven productions. The Big Short became his pivot from entertainment entrepreneur to cultural economist. Critics, in retrospective essays, have come to describe the film as cinematic literacy training for capitalism. The Los Angeles Review of Books called it a public service disguised as a movie. Even dissenting voices, those who found the editing too chaotic or the humor too dark, inadvertently confirmed his thesis. Discomfort is the price of understanding. Every reviewer, whether admiring or exasperated, acknowledged the precision of intent. The legacy forecast of The Big Short is remarkable in both qualitative and quantitative terms. Financially, it continues to generate licensing income from universities, business schools, and educational streaming platforms, a rare post-theatrical revenue stream for any studio picture. Culturally, it remains the most accessible dramatization of systemic risk ever made. Within 2 decades, it's likely to be studied the way All the President's Men is studied for political journalism, as a definitive cinematic artifact of its crisis. And morally, its endurance may be even greater. It stands as a case study in narrative ethics, proof that storytelling can serve as oversight when institutions fail. By converting outrage into knowledge and knowledge into awareness, The Big Short performs the highest function of art. It educates the conscience while entertaining the mind. So, my literature-loving friends, the critical and cultural reception of The Big Short isn't just a story of awards or acclaim. It's a demonstration of how cinema, when executed with courage and intelligence, can outperform traditional journalism as a vessel for truth. Its legacy compounds not through profit but through perception, accruing interest in every mind it awakens. Behind the scenes, The Big Short was not filmed in chaos. It was orchestrated like a market simulation, where every creative decision carried financial and emotional calculus. What unfolded off-camera mirrored the film's themes: intellect wrestling with risk, improvisation against structure, and the constant balancing of principle versus profitability. The set became a living case study in creative economics, a place where collaboration was currency, and every department operated like a micro-hedge fund trading ideas, time, and trust. Adam McKay, known for Anchorman and Step Brothers, arrived with the unlikely conviction that comedy could clarify the 2008 collapse better than any textbook. His shift from pure satire to socio-economic cinema startled Hollywood. Insiders describe him as running the set like a newsroom, whiteboards filled with charts of global debt, post-its tagged moral hazard, and daily briefings explaining subprime logic to the cast. Actors weren't memorizing jargon, they were decoding it. McKay held what he called crash courses before major scenes, guiding everyone to the real mathematics of mortgage bonds, so that every inflection of frustration or disbelief would emerge authentically. Christian Bale immersed himself in Michael Burry's reality with almost algorithmic devotion. To inhabit Burry's idiosyncratic genius, Bale learned real drumming patterns, memorized Bloomberg interfaces, and even requested live trading screens on set displaying 2007-era bond data. Between takes, he would pace silently in his bare feet, adjusting spreadsheets the crew had prepared as props but which he treated as functional models. Steve Carell, drawing from interviews with Steve Eisman, spent hours discussing moral anger and survivor's guilt, often breaking into unscripted monologues that McKay encouraged cameras to capture. Those improvisations became some of the film's most haunting moments, the catharsis of a man trying to morally short the system. Ryan Gosling, meanwhile, approached Jared Vennett as a psychological performance of liquidity. His smirk, voiceover timing, and rehearsed swagger were calibrated in collaboration with McKay to manipulate rhythm like a salesman managing FOMO. Behind the camera, he kept a running joke that his character sold exposition the way brokers sell dreams. Brad Pitt, ever the minimalist, functioned as both producer and actor, Off-screen, he was a film stabilizer, meeting financiers, monitoring schedules, and reminding everyone that their satire was also a memorial for millions who lost homes. Crew members said his quiet presence on set felt like the adult supervision of capitalism. The shooting style required technical agility bordering on chaos theory. McKay encouraged multiple cameras to roll simultaneously, allowing actors to improvise freely. Cinematographer Barry Ackroyd often described it as filming volatility in its natural habitat. This meant camera operators were constantly in motion, chasing emotion rather than marking positions. In post-production, editor Hank Corwin sorted through terabytes of footage that behaved like a fluctuating market feed. Thousands of moments, no fixed order. His solution, cut not by continuity but by information flow. Each scene's rhythm was determined by what the audience should know, when and how intensely. That editing logic created the film's signature pulse, a syncopated tempo that mimics the sound of trading floors. One of the most striking behind-the-scenes innovations was the data wall. McKay's team built a rolling digital display that tracked everything from scene completion to shot efficiency, time lost, and cost per minute. The crew jokingly called it the Dow Jones of production. If a scene overran its estimated schedule, red numbers appeared. If they came in under, the screen flashed green. It gamified productivity, turning filmmaking into live performance analytics. Yet McKay used it not for control but awareness, proof that even art, when watched by numbers, behaves differently. Production design under Clayton Hartley recreated the psychological geography of finance. Office spaces were constructed to reflect moral distance, Burry's environment sterile and data-obsessed, Baum's cramped, paper-strewn, furious, Bennett's glass-paneled and performative. Real-world mortgage offices in Florida were dressed with authentic bank signage and leftover paperwork from foreclosed properties, grounding the satire in reality. Crew members reported moments of eerie discomfort while shooting in abandoned homes that once belonged to real families, the ghosts of the crisis breathing inside the fiction. Sound mixers often recorded actors while cameras were resetting, capturing organic fragments of laughter or frustration. These snippets later formed transitional audio bridges in editing, giving the finished film its quasi-documentary immediacy. That texture was accidental at first, but became deliberate, a sonic index of capitalism's background noise. Morale on set swung between intellectual exhilaration and quiet grief. Many crew members recall McKay's insistence on keeping empathy central. We're not mocking people who didn't understand. We're indicting those who did. Between scenes, he screened real foreclosure footage and documentaries for reference, grounding the humor in ethical weight. The team nicknamed these sessions reality checks. Post-production turned into a laboratory of precision. Corwin's editing bay resembled a war room plastered with timelines, economic charts, and cue cards labeled trust, greed, denial. Test screenings were treated as focus group analytics. Each pause of laughter or silence logged like volatility data. When early audiences seemed confused by terminology, McKay inserted the now iconic celebrity explainers. Margot Robbie in a bubble bath, Anthony Bourdain in a kitchen. Shot months after principal photography. They were late-stage reshoots but functioned as liquidity injections, restoring comprehension without diluting pace. Marketing synergy began before the film even wrapped. Paramount's on-set documentary crew captured interviews for later featurettes emphasizing authenticity. The practical lights, real economists visiting the set, McKay's teaching sessions. These behind-the-scenes clips circulated online months before release, building intellectual anticipation instead of gossip. Despite its technical experimentation, the production finished ahead of schedule and under budget. Crew reports credit that to the same ethos the film critiques: accountability. Every department understood cost as moral responsibility. When wrap day arrived, McKay reportedly thanked the team not for efficiency, but for making intelligence emotional. That sentence became unofficial motto for everyone who'd worked on it. In retrospect, The Big Short's behind-the-scenes story mirrors the crisis exposes. But inverted, where Wall Street's recklessness produced disaster, McKay's structured risk produced enlightenment. The set functioned like a transparent economy, open information, distributed responsibility, and constant recalibration. No derivatives, no deception, just people betting that truth could be cinematic, and that, my literature-loving friends, is a hidden genius of its production, a filmmaking ecosystem that practiced what the film preached. Accountability replaced speculation. Knowledge replaced noise. And from that disciplined chaos emerged not only one of the decade's sharpest films, but creative models showing that art, when manners like ethics, can outperform even the most profitable illusions. Themes and symbolism in The Big Short operate on two simultaneous planes, the intellectual and the moral. On one level, the film is a pragmatic dissection of financial engineering, a dramatized course in macroeconomics and moral hazard. But underneath that rational scaffolding lies something more primal, a story about blindness, belief, and the tragic poetry of intelligence misused. Adam McKay turns a housing collapse not just into a cautionary tale about capitalism, but into an allegory of civilization's perpetual overconfidence, how progress always carries within it the DNA of its own collapse. At its thematic center lies the illusion of knowledge. The entire financial system, McKay argues, was sustained by narratives masquerading as facts. The ratings agencies believed they could quantify morality, the bankers believed risk could be hidden in complexity, and society believed prosperity was infinite. The film's constant breaking of the fourth wall becomes a metaphor for this epistemic crisis. Characters literally looking into the camera, forcing us to acknowledge that we, too, are part of the delusion. When Jared Vennett smirks and explains how the system works, it's not exposition, it's confession. The viewer becomes complicit, absorbing financial deceit as entertainment. This dynamic embodies the film's most painful insight. Ignorance isn't passive, it's profitable. Another dominant theme is moral asymmetry, how ethics and economics scale at different rates. The few who see the collapse coming, like Burry and Baum, must confront an existential paradox. They can't save the system without betraying their own intelligence. Their profits depend on the world's suffering. This creates the film's haunting subtext, the commodification of conscience. In economic terms, The Big Short explores the externalities of genius. When brilliance generates knowledge faster than morality can process it, the protagonists aren't heroes. They're analysts of apocalypse. Hubris is woven into every frame, both visually and thematically. The bank skyscrapers, the glistening glass offices, the language of certainty, all symbols of civilization that confuses height with security. The recurring use of glass and reflection in cinematography doubles as thematic architecture. Transparency without clarity. Everyone sees everything, yet no one understands. Even the film's color palette follows this arc, warm optimism cooling into sterile blue-gray disillusionment. It's a visual entropy of belief. Capitalism as faith emerges as a near-religious motif. McKay stages a market as a secular deity, invisible, omnipotent, immoral. The traders pray not in churches but in Bloomberg terminals. Their liturgy is data. When the crash arrives, the revelation isn't divine wrath, but systemic correction. The film's moral theology is brutal. Sin isn't punished by justice but by math. Burry's quiet line, "I may have been early, but I'm not wrong," becomes a scripture of reason in a faith-based economy. The theme of communication failure runs parallel. Every attempt at truth-telling, Burry's memos, Baum's confrontations, even Vennett's cynical pitch, collapses under the weight of disbelief. The movie implies that modern society no longer rewards clarity. It rewards confidence. The louder the lie, the higher the stock price. This dynamic extends to the viewer. McKay overwhelms us with jargon, laughter, and chaos until we realize that our own comprehension has limits. That realization, the admission of not knowing, becomes an act of humility. The film's moral victory lies not in revelation but in awareness. On a symbolic level, Las Vegas functions as the film's dark mirror, capitalism cathedral. When Baum's team attend a conference there, surrounded by bright lights and slot machines, it's not just setting, it's allegory. Wall Street and the casino are one organism, speculation and gambling sharing the same soundtrack of adrenaline. The location literalizes a theme, profit as addiction. Every decision is a spin of the wheel, and luck has replaced merit as the moral currency of survival. Another recurring symbol is the home, the foundational promise of the American dream. McKay frames houses as both sanctuary and speculation. A home should represent belonging, yet here it becomes collateral. When Baum's team visits foreclosed suburbs, the empty swimming pools and silent streets symbolize a kind of national amnesia, the ruins of collective trust. The film equates economic collapse with spiritual homelessness, a society that sold its shelter for short-term yield. Sound and music amplify these symbols. Brittle's alternating use of funk and solemn piano parallels the duality of delusion and reckoning. The playful beats during scenes of moral corruption reflect how sin can sound seductive, while the sparse strings of the end strip that seduction bear. Even the rhythm of editing, rapid, disjointed, unpredictable, becomes thematic expression, volatility as narrative language. Thematically, The Big Short also serves as a memento mori for modern rationality. It shows how intelligence, when detached from empathy, become self-consuming. The men who outsmarted the market discover that knowledge without wisdom is simply another form of ignorance. Burry's retreat from the world, Baum's moral exhaustion, and Rickard's guilt crystallize into a single truth. Seeing too much doesn't guarantee salvation. In fact, it often guarantees despair. There's also an undercurrent of satirical redemption, McKay's insistence that laughter can function as resistance. Comedy, in this context, isn't escapism but weaponry. The humor disarms, then indicts. It transforms abstract outrage into accessible awareness. This is the film's final paradox. It makes us laugh at our own exploitation, so that we can recognize it. The jokes aren't cushioning the pain, they're sharpening it. From a symbolic macro view, The Big Short is structured like the market it critiques. The first act builds optimism, bull market. The second reveals stress, volatility. The third collapses, bear market. And the epilogue restores equilibrium, knowledge replacing capital as the final asset. The end, text cards, revealing that the same risky instruments re-emerged under new names, are more than information. They're a grim metaphor for human memory. We rename our mistakes to make them tradable again. Ultimately, every theme, greed, ignorance, intellect, morality, converges on one haunting equation. Awareness minus accountability equals apocalypse. That formula, buried beneath McKay's humor and editing fireworks, is the real thesis of the film. So, my literature-loving friends, when you peel back the laughter and data, what remains is a requiem for reason, a story about how civilizations crumble not from lack of intelligence, but from excess of it, mispriced and misused. The Big Short isn't merely about markets collapsing. It's about meaning collapsing, the moment when truth itself becomes just another asset to be shorted. Filmmaking technique in The Big Short functions as infrastructure. Every cinematic decision doubles as a psychological and financial mechanism, linking form to thesis. Adam McKay didn't simply tell the story of the 2008 crash. He built a visual and editorial architecture that behaves like the economy itself. Fast, impulsive, data-saturated, and prone to illusion. It's one of the few films where technique is theme. The tools of cinema become analogs to the tools of speculation, and the viewer experiences information the same way the market does, in bursts of beauty, panic, and noise. McKay and his longtime editor, Hank Corwin, approached the edit like quantitative analysts model risk. Instead of smoothing transitions, they weaponized discontinuity. The film is constructed from over 4,000 cuts, each jump calibrated to emulate the volatility of market data. Corwin described his process as emotional algorithm design. He sliced through scenes mid-dialogue, cross-cutting between trading floors, news footage, music videos, and archival fragments of pop culture. Paris Hilton ads, Britney Spears, Iraq war clips, forming a nonlinear timeline of distraction. Those insertions aren't random, they're meta-commentary. They replicate how the American consciousness absorbed distraction, while the real disaster brewed unseen. Every cut is a stock tick, a flicker of information disguised as entertainment. This editing logic creates the film's defining rhythm, cognitive whiplash. The audience's comprehension constantly resets, mirroring how investors misread market signals. The pace forces you to feel information overload. When Steve Carell's character shouts, they're selling garbage to widows and orphans, the edit fractures mid-sentence, cutting to glossy financial ads, a little depiction of capitalism interrupting conscience. Cinematography, Barry Ackroyd, extends this language of instability. The handheld ARI Alexa, already discussed earlier, merges documentary realism with cinematic dynamism. Ackroyd uses reframing and whip pans as rhetorical punctuation, ensuring no image feels secure. The camera corrects itself, always late by a second, the optical metaphor for hindsight. This kinetic imperfection breaks the illusion of authority, reminding viewers that truth here is improvised, not authored. Lighting and lensing strategies complement the editorial tempo. Early scenes glow in golden tones, signifying optimism and liquidity. As the bubble swells, Ackroyd introduces sterile blue and white fluorescence, flattening contrast. The image grows colder, like cash draining from the system. By the crash sequence, the world is lit like a morgue, overexposed, clinical, stripped of warmth. It's visual quantitative easing, artificial brightness masking moral decay. McKay's directorial approach to narrative structure borrows from both comedy and documentary. The breaking of the fourth wall, characters directly addressing the audience, isn't a gimmick but an epistemological device. Each address functions like an earnings report, an interruption of illusion with accountability. When Margot Robbie explains mortgage bonds, She becomes both celebrity and educator, a living credit rating agency translating toxicity into pleasure. The meta-narration, primarily Gosling's smug commentary, also acts as a hedge. We're reminded that even narrators can be trusted. The film sound design and music integration, Nicholas Britell, reinforce this fragmentation. Brittle's score modulates genres like an index fund diversifying assets. Funk, classical, electronica. Every shift signals emotional volatility. McKay syncs musical cues with narrative momentum. Not to underscore emotion, but to parody it. Upbeat music plays over scenes of moral rot, turning irony into structural rhythm. When the crash hits, the soundtrack withdraws completely, leaving the hum of empty trading floors. Silence becomes the truest sound, the market gone mute. Another extraordinary filmmaking technique is McKay's use of real data as mise-en-scene. Monitors display authentic bond rates. Background screens flicker with actual Bloomberg feeds from 2007. Newspaper headlines are not props but archival facsimiles. This documentary precision blurs fiction and fact until they're indistinguishable, the same confusion that fueled the real crisis. The camera doesn't just observe characters. It tracks data moving through their world, rendering the intangible visible. Even the performances are directed with algorithmic precision. McKay encouraged multiple takes with different emotional frequencies, one angry, one detached, one bemused, allowing the editor to choose moods like a trader selecting options. This multi-emotional shooting style produced tonal variants that made scenes feel volatile, shifting from humor to despair within seconds. It's filmmaking by emotional derivatives, risk spread across takes. The production design amplifies texture as semiotics. Glass walls dominate interiors, symbolizing transparency that conceals. Office clutter represents informational density. Sticky notes, paper stacks, monitors layer like spreadsheets. In contrast, the suburban exteriors in Florida are minimalist, pastel, and eerily empty, the visual void left after liquidity evaporates. Even costume design follows a symbolic logic. Burry's shorts and bare feet contrast with Gosling's fitted suits, externalizing the dichotomy between authenticity and performance, data and spectacle. From a macro-technical standpoint, The Big Short redefined the grammar of nonfiction cinema within fiction. It applied documentary editing theory, associated montage, direct address, archival cross-cutting to a scripted narrative, pioneering a hybrid genre often imitated but rarely matched. The film's visual grammar influenced later political and biographical works, Vice, Don't Look Up, The Laundromat, solidifying McKay's economic cinema style, filmmaking as system analysis. In the box office ecosystem, this aesthetic experimentation paid off like an unlikely investment. The film grossed $133 million globally on a $50 million budget, an ROI of nearly 3 times, plus back-end revenue from awards, licensing, and streaming. Its long-tail profitability mirrors a blue-chip stock, modest at first, exponential over time. The same qualities that made it intellectually dense also gave it academic immortality, guaranteeing perpetual demand in classrooms, conferences, and online discussions. Symbolically, McKay's techniques mirror the moral cycle he's documenting. His camera behaves like greed, restless, confident, convinced of its insight. His editing mimics panic. His humor masks dread. The final tonal shift, from manic comedy to quiet despair, completes the structural analogy. It's not just a crash in story. It's a crash in rhythm, pacing, and sound. The film self-destructs formally to embody the system's collapse. By the closing frames, filmmaking itself becomes a metaphor for market, a network of competing inputs producing unstable value. The credits roll like ledger entries. Names, roles, contributions, a human balance sheet of responsibility. And that, my literature-loving friends, is where the true innovation lies. The Big Short isn't cinematic storytelling. It's cinematic auditing. McKay transforms the grammar of film into the syntax of finance, proving that editing can simulate capitalism's speed and silence can measure its cost. In doing so, he doesn't just expose a crisis. He reprograms cinema to think like an economist. The cast of The Big Short functions as a film's human algorithm, a constellation of distinct energies and intellects that convert abstract economics into emotional storytelling. The ensemble isn't just performing roles. They're translating data into behavior. Every actor becomes a psychological conduit for one of capitalism's archetypes. The genius who sees too far ahead, the moralist crushed by insight, the salesman who thrives in deception, and a retiree who has already lost faith in the game. Their chemistry is what transforms a film from a financial diagram into a living, breathing ecosystem. Christian Bale's portrayal of Michael Burry is almost unervingly internal. He doesn't perform intellect. He inhabits it. With glassy detachment and rhythmic tics, Bale turns Burry's autism spectrum focus into cinematic texture, an intelligence so precise it isolates him. The stillness of his body, the absences between his words, feel louder than the market itself. When he locks himself in his office, listening to metal music, while analyzing mortgage data, Bale projects both control and collapse, the cost of genius measured in solitude. His eyes never quite meet another's, as if he's staring through the world into its data stream. Critics called it one of Bale's most restrained performances, but restraint here is revelation. He makes math feel tragic. Steve Carell, as Mark Baum, a fictionalized Steve Eisman, channels moral exhaustion with volcanic energy. His anger isn't theatrical rage, it's ethical burnout. Carell, once the face of office comedy, weaponizes that familiarity, his nervous timing, the half-swallowed lines, to portray a man drowning in truth. Every scene with him carries the electricity of conscience fighting denial. When he finally realizes the scale of the fraud, Carell's silence becomes indictment. Viewers expecting humor find grief instead, and that shock is intentional. McKay uses Carell's comic rhythm as misdirection. The joke dies mid-laugh, leaving only disgust. Ryan Gosling, as Jared Vennett, based on Greg Lippman, is pure liquidity, sleek, volatile, transactional. He narrates the film like a stockbroker giving a TED talk to God. Gosling's charisma becomes a mirror for Wall Street seduction. We like him against our better judgment. His every gesture is calibrated swagger, the smirk that sells lies, the confidence that makes exploitation sound rational. His voiceover work, sardonic and precise, gives a film its pulse. Vennett isn't just a character. He's the system's conscience rationalizing itself in real time. Brad Pitt plays Ben Rickard, the retired trader who guides the two young investors, Charlie and Jamie. Pitt's minimalism is chilling, his presence an ethical counterweight to the mania around him. Off-screen, as producer, he anchored the film's realism. On-screen, he personifies its moral hangover. When he warns the young traders not to celebrate their profit, because it means millions will lose homes, the line lands like scripture. Pitt's weary gravity gives the film its soul. He speaks softly, but his words cut through the noise of algorithms and greed, like a closing bell. The younger investors, John Magaro and Finn Wittrock, play Charlie Geller and Jamie Shipley, the amateurs who stumble into apocalypse. Their naive exuberance injects youth into the film's cynicism. They're our entry point. The dreamers still believing capitalism rewards cleverness. When they finally understand the cost of their victory, the audience witnesses innocence priced out of existence. McKay stages their moral awakening in silence. No speech, just a tightening of breath, and both actors deliver it with haunting subtlety. The supporting cast extends his realism with precision casting. Melissa Leo's brief turn as the blindfolded ratings agent in Dark Glasses condenses bureaucratic complicity into one unforgettable scene. Her calm voice, dismissing ethical collapse with bureaucratic detachment, becomes a sound of institutional rot. Marissa Tomei as Baum's wife embodies a domestic toll of obsession, her quiet worry grounding Carell's chaos. Hamish Linklater, Jeremy Strong, and Rafe Spall as Baum's team give ensemble coherence to moral outrage. Their overlapping dialogue feels improvised but lands with surgical rhythm. The performances together form a portfolio of humanity, diversified across intellect, ethics, and ego. Each actor contributes a different emotional asset class. Bale offers analytical isolation, logic capital. Carell emotional volatility, moral liquidity. Gosling persuasive manipulation, charisma equity. And Pitt philosophical stability, ethical bonds. The ensemble synergy isn't accidental. McKay directed them like a diversified investment fund, ensuring no single performance dominated the market of attention. The result is balanced volatility, tension that feels organic yet precisely hedged. What's remarkable is how the film uses casting as commentary. Every actor carries audience expectation from previous work and repurposes it. Bale, known for physical transformation, transforms inwardly. Carell, the comedian, becomes tragic conscience. Gosling, the romantic hero, becomes a seductive villain. Pitt, the leading man, becomes a moral observer. McKay intentionally plays against type, subverting the viewer's predictive model, just as the market punished those who trusted past performance. Critical response mirrored this brilliance. Bale earned an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor, praised for his ability to make introversion cinematic. Carell received Golden Globe and BAFTA nominations, with critics highlighting his feral humanity. Gosling's narration drew attention for redefining exposition as performance, and Pitt's understated gravitas was lauded as the still point in Storm of Deceit. The ensemble received the Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance, confirming what audiences already felt, that collective intelligence can be as thrilling as spectacle. On a meta level, the cast diversity of tone mirrors the structure of the market itself. Independent entities, competing yet interconnected, driven by self-interest but bound by shared risk. McKay's genius lay in directing contradiction, intellect colliding with humor, despair colliding with arrogance, and letting that friction generate narrative energy. By the end, the performances converge into a single emotional chord, enlightenment without joy. Each actor, once confident in control, exits their arc hollowed out. Burry retreats to solitude, Baum stares into moral abyss, Bennett pockets his commission without reflection, and Rickard walks away from a profit that feels like sin. Their journeys form an emotional income statement. Profit on paper, loss in soul. And that, my literature-loving friends, is why The Big Short endures not just as a film, but as a study in collective artistry. Its cast doesn't perform finance. They perform the psychology of a civilization addicted to certainty. Every line, glance, and silence carries a weight of numbers turning into tragedy. The actors aren't dramatizing the market. They are the market, in all its brilliance, blindness, and shame. The conclusion of The Big Short feels less like a curtain call and more like an audit report. One final ledger written in light, sound, and exhaustion. What began as a film about finance ends as a meditation on morality, language, and the very idea of truth in modern civilization. There is no final explosion, no cathartic redemption, no music swelling toward reassurance. Instead, McKay closes his cinematic balance sheet with quiet precision, forcing us to reconcile profit with consequence. It's the stillness after the storm, when everyone realizes that survival itself has become the ugliest form of victory. By the end, every character has profited from catastrophe. Michael Burry retreats to silence, having made hundreds of millions by shorting the housing market. Mark Baum, shattered by the collapse, watches his moral indignation dissolve into despair. Jared Vennett collects his bonuses and narrates his triumph with smug irony. And Ben Rickard, the moral outsider, returns to solitude, his conscience heavy with the knowledge that his profit was paid for in ruin. The market has crashed, but the system remains intact, bruised, rebranded, and ready to start again. In a cruel symmetry, McKay uses those final title cards to reveal that the same toxic instruments responsible for the collapse have already been renamed and sold again. The film ends not with destruction, but with repetition. Capitalism's most dependable sequel. This closing act transforms The Big Short from narrative into mirror. What we witness isn't resolution but reflection, the audience staring back at itself through the glass of moral complicity. McKay's closing montage of news clips, housing ruins, and boardroom silence becomes a cinematic audit of the collective unconscious. Every viewer is implicated. The laughter that once made the jargon palatable now curdles into guilt. That tonal collapse, from comedy to tragedy without warning, is the film's final emotional trade. The joke has matured into awareness, and awareness, in McKay's moral economy, is the only real currency. Stylistically, the film's final rhythm slows almost imperceptibly. The editing, once frenetic, breathes. The handheld camera steadies for the first time, as though exhaustion has finally conquered motion. The light cools. The palette fades into grayscale. It's not visual fatigue. It's emotional recession. The silence that follows isn't emptiness, but the debt of having known too much and done too little. Even the sound mix shifts. The hum of trading floors and the beat of funk give way to ambient stillness, broken only by the software machine still running. The economy, like consciousness, doesn't die. It just resets its parameters. Thematically, the conclusion distills a film philosophy. Information without empathy is entropy. McKay's parting message is not that capitalism is evil, but that it is blind, a machine that rewards intelligence stripped of ethics. In one of the film's most telling details, Burry's final scene includes a subtitle noting that he has now begun investing heavily in water, the next finite resource to be commodified. It's a line that transforms irony into prophecy, the next bubble already forming. The world never learns. It merely rebrands its mistakes. There is also a profound sadness beneath the satire. McKay's direction, for all its anger, never loses compassion for those crushed beneath the system's weight. The brief flashes of families losing homes, the empty suburban streets, the closing montage of real footage, all remind us that behind the abstractions of finance lie faces, bodies, and losses too large for spreadsheets. The film's closing tone is elegiac, not cynical. It mourns the death of accountability, the erosion of trust, and the triumph of abstraction over humanity. On a metatextual level, The Big Short ends where it began, as an experiment in cinematic consciousness. McKay uses the language of film, jump cuts, irony, humor, direct address, to mimic the mechanics of financial storytelling, then collapses that very language in the final scenes. The movie eats its own technique, leaving only stillness and text. In doing so, it mirrors the implosion of the market. When systems collapse, all that remains are numbers and the silence of those who once believed they controlled them. Critically, this ending has been interpreted as both pessimistic and redemptive. Pessimistic because the cycle seems inevitable, redemptive because awareness has at least been purchased. Viewers leave not comforted but awakened. The emotional equivalent of reading one's own bank statement after a lifetime of denial. McKay doesn't offer solutions. He offers comprehension, and comprehension, in a world built on misinformation, becomes radical. The final message, stark and unadorned, is simple. The next crisis will not be born of ignorance, but of knowledge misused. In financial language, The Big Short closes in the black, a profit of insight, a surplus of conscience. But emotionally, it ends in deficit. Every dollar gained has cost something irretrievable. Faith in the idea that systems can correct themselves, or that intelligence alone can save us. The camera fades to black, as if closing a book of accounts that can never balance. And so, my literature-loving friends, when we reach the end of the cinematic audit, we are left with the one truth McKay forces us to confront. That understanding the machinery of collapse doesn't free us from it. The market recovers, the world forgets, and the same old greed rebrands itself as innovation. But cinema, for once, remembers. It becomes a moral memory capitalism keeps trying to erase. If you found this exploration meaningful, if you, too, believe that art can decode the algorithms of human folly, consider liking and subscribing, so together we can keep decoding the business and beauty of cinema one truth at a time.